Most of us have them. Some of us like feet more than others. I have seen the comments when I show my feet in a video. I'm watching you. And some of us are in the GNOME project and like feet so much that it's the logo of the entire project. But is it time to leave the foot behind? Does the foot really fit with the image that GNOME is trying to have today? Well, Cassidy James, who you may know as a co-founder of Elementary OS, now at the Endless OS Foundation, has some thoughts on that topic in a new blog post. GNOME should kick the foot to the curb, mostly. After some criticism regarding the framing of some of the arguments he made, it has been updated, but for the most part, it's pretty much the exact same thing. So you may remember about a week ago, people making a big deal about the new GNOME site redesign. I didn't make a video on this because, frankly, I didn't really think it was that interesting. And look, this has all of the hallmarks of modern, bad website design, and nothing negative to the designers here. They just exist in a system where this is good design, where you want to have a website that has no information until you scroll down. Nothing of use, and when you do have information, have as little information over as much space as possible. Personally, I wish this trend would stop and we could go back to sites that are actually useful. But the main point here is the logo. Initially, this did not have the foot. All it had was the name GNOME. And this site was met with some reactions. It's beautiful, modern, nice work. Again, I don't like the way it's designed, but regardless, where is the foot? To me, it seems like the latter reaction was most of the sentiment of a handful of long-time contributors who've understandably grown very cozy with the current GNOME logo. And it makes sense how this happened, because this has been the logo for a very, very long time. The current GNOME logo is a four-toed foot that is sort of supposed to look like a G. It looks more like a C to me. Maybe, you can kind of see a G, possibly. According to legend, read my conversations with designers and contributors who've been working with GNOME for more years than I have fingers and toes, it is basically a story of happenstance. An early wallpaper featured footprints in the sand. That was modified into an icon for the menu. This one here, that was turned into sort of a logo while being modified to look like the letter G, and then that version was flattened and cleaned up a bit and successfully trademarked by the GNOME Foundation in 2002. The logo for GNOME hasn't changed in going on 23 years now. Let me just give you some context so you understand how long this logo has been in use for. This is 2 years prior to Ubuntu existing. It is a year prior to Fedora. RHEL was about 2 years old, and Red Hat Linux was still around. Red Hat Linux wouldn't be dead for another year. Here's some better context. The GNOME desktop was 3 years old at this point. It only came out in 1999, and Debian hadn't even hit 10 years old yet. It was only 9 years old. Now, the very important question: why do people like the foot? It's always been this way. As long as GNOME has had an official logo, it's been a variation of the foot. Basically, it's tradition. It's the same reason why people didn't really like the Death of the Fox. And now you can argue the Death of the Fox was like a different thing. It was the Mozilla logo, not the Firefox logo. Either way, people didn't really like the direction that Mozilla was going with their logo development. 2. It's a trademark, so it's not feasible to change it from a legal or financial perspective. Now, it can absolutely be done. See every single company that has an overpaid design team that wants to keep themselves employed. But it is a lot of additional work for something which doesn't really add any additional value. Now, the following two stances are where I sit. It has personality, and anything new would run the risk of being bland. I have seen the way GNOME approaches design now. I am very worried by whatever would be made by the modern GNOME team. It would... Look, they do great work. I just do not agree with the design philosophy they have now. And the second one, it has wide recognition, at least within the open source enthusiast and developer space, so changing it would be detrimental to the brand equity. It's been the logo for more time than most people have used Linux. People know this as the GNOME logo. Changing it now seems like changing it just for the sake of it. What's the problem then? Cassidy does not like the foot and does not think it is a particularly good logo. Over time, I've narrowed down my thoughts and the feedback I've heard from others into a recurring reason. Firstly, it doesn't convey anything about the name or the project, which by itself may be fine. Many logos don't, but it feels odd to have such a bold logo choice that doesn't directly relate to the name GNOME or to any specific aspect of the project. This is a problem that a lot of companies have, and the reason why a lot of them just go with their name. Now, some of them try to be fancy with their name, like the KN car, which is a major design screw-up that Kia had with their new logo, and I don't think they've addressed it. They just went with the logo. It's an awkward shape that doesn't fit cleanly into a square or circle, especially at a smaller size, e.g. for social media avatar or favicon. It's much taller than it is wider, and it's lopsided weight-wise. Here is an example. How do you center this correctly? Do you center it based on the toes? Do you center it based on this part here? Do you just go with whatever it thinks the center is, which is going to look off? And then on social media platforms like Mastodon, I think that is, it like cuts off the top of the toe, and there's just not really any good way to deal with it as is. This, I think, is a completely legitimate reason to redesign the foot. I don't think the foot should be removed, but going with something that makes a lot more sense for, like, web usage, I think might be a good idea. Keep in mind, the logo was designed in 2002, MySpace was started in 2003, so social media was very young. It is actively off-putting and unappealing to at least some folks, including much of the GNOME design team, newer contributors, people outside open source bubble, and apparently entire cultures, which has been raised multiple times over the past 20 years. So this first one is just someone saying, oh, this could be offensive, which is not helpful to anybody whatsoever. This other one, though, does raise a good point. Apparently, this is news to me, showing the soles your feet to someone in Thailand is considered rude. If anybody is from Thailand and can correct that, or if maybe that's a thing with like older generations and not younger generations, I would love to know. That's at least what I've read. I read what they said here, I looked online, it seems like that's the case, but I am not in Thailand. Anecdotally, almost everyone new of introduced to GNOME has turned their nose up at the weird foot, whether it's when showing the website or rocking a tee or sticker to support the project. It doesn't exactly set a great first impression for a community and modern computing platform. And yes, there are a bunch of dumb memes out there about GNOME devs all being foot fetishes, which I started the video with, and I will not apologize for that because it is funny. While I'm not one to shame what people are into, it is not exactly the brand image you want for your global, inclusive, open source project. Well, at least for this final part, I think, welcoming the foot fetishists is, fairly inclusive. I understand for the, people in Thailand part, that's a bit more of an issue though. It raises the question of what the role of the design team is. If the design team cannot be allowed to effectively lead the design of the project, what are we even doing? I think this is why the topic feels so existential to me as a member of the design team. User experience design includes the moment someone first interacts with the brand of a product through them actually using it day to day. And right now, the design team's hands are tied for the first half of that journey. So what can we do? What can be done? While there are some folks that would push for a complete rebrand of GNOME, name included, I feel like there's a softer approach we could take to the issue. I would also like to point out that the vast majority of people using GNOME, those on Ubuntu, RHEL, Fedora, NSOS, Debian, etc., are not seeing the foot anywhere. They're seeing their distro's logo, and for many, are using e.g. Ubuntu, and may not even be aware they're using GNOME. Now, the question here is, do you want to erase the importance of GNOME on these systems? Do you want it to be the case that a user is on Fedora or Ubuntu or RHEL or Debian and not know they are using GNOME? Or is it better to strengthen the image of GNOME and make it much clearer that this is an open source project as a part of this stack? I think that's very important to have in a separate discussion though. Given everything said so far, here is Cassidy's plan. Phase the foot out from any remaining user-facing spaces. This has been an unspoken natural phenomenon as members of the GNOME design team have soured a bit on trying to make designs look nice while accommodating the foot. Commission a new brand logo. As I said before, I am very worried that whatever ends up being commissioned is the most generic, milquetoast, modern design I've come to expect from GNOME. Now, is that guaranteed to be the case? No. But, you know, following on from the way things have been done recently, it's a reasonable thing to expect. It could still be something quirky, cute, and whimsical. I personally don't love the idea of something super generic as a logo. I think something connects to gnomes, our history, and or our illustration style would be great here. This is where the problems can occur. But if this does happen, we'll have to wait and see how it goes. I'm sure there will be multiple iterations and people supplying logos and things like that. Refresh the official GNOME brand guidelines. Understandable. Immortalize the foot as a mascot. Now, work out how to sell a plushie. People will buy it. I know merch is hard, but there are companies you can work with that go and do this for you. Sell a foot plushie. I guarantee people will buy it. I will be one of them because it would be funny, but a lot of other people that actually use GNOME would as well. Stretch goal. Title case GNOME as a brand name. We've long moved past GNOME being an acronym, GNU Network Object Model Environment. With a bit of a soft rebrand, I feel we could officially say that it's spelt GNOME, especially if done so in an official logo type. As we know, much like the pronunciation of GNOME itself, folks will do what they want, and they're free to. But this would be more about how the brand name is used/styled in an official capacity. I don't like this. I really don't. KDE is another example where KDE isn't an acronym anymore. It started as the cool desktop environment, with cool spelt with a K because it's so cool, but now KDE just stands for KDE. That's it. Maybe you can say the K desktop environment, even that is not used. It's just KDE. Just because it's all in capitals doesn't mean it still has to have that acronym usage. I do think making this change is just removing a bit of that uniqueness from GNOME. It doesn't feel necessary to me. It makes it stand out when you're writing it. It's GNOME. I don't really see a reason to do this. Maybe you could say this is an alternative way to represent the name if you want to use it like that, but personally, I like it the way it is. Now, Cassidy does something really cool, which is also kind of a big mistake. The comments on his website are tied to replies on Mastodon. So there's plenty of replies here, However, it's tied to social media, which means you get some fine replies, and others, it's a bit unhinged. However, Emmanuel Bassi makes some rare good points. A bunch of people trolling about foot fetishes is not a good reason why a project should nuke a 25-year-old established brand unless you're the one with a kink problem. And this one here, the only people I see complaining are young folks with a pretty weird obsession about feet and a tendency at cringing at stuff unless it's bland and devoid of any personality, so they don't have to confront or develop any emotional response to it. This is such a good comment. It doesn't just apply to GNOME and the foot logo. So much else this applies to. I feel like he said something similar regarding the GNOME circle logo, but I might be misremembering. Also, Draculix of the Cosmic Project chimed in. The thing I find most baffling here, that nobody seems to acknowledge that the logo should be something the GNOME contributors first and foremost are able to identify with. And feeling a bit weirded out about the logo repeatedly being used as a punchline with a sexual connotation isn't about kink shaming, that is personal preference and totally valid. So even if GNOME would be going corporate here, if that is what the overall project wants to represent, what exactly is the issue? This is not about some corporate entity forcing a sterile image for marketing. Other projects have more professional icons after all, and nobody bats an eye. I think that's a totally fair point. Nobody is forcing the logo to change, although I don't particularly like the direction they're going with the design. If that's the direction they want to go, hey, it's their project, they can do what they want. And of course, Neil Gomper is here, and he got into a bit of an argument with Cassidy. My issue with this is that by professionalizing it like this, you've essentially gutted any visibility of the community the project actually is. In general, I think giving up the personality of projects and communities leads to strictly worse products and services. Cassidy says, hey Neil, did you read the blog post? And Neil was not a fan of that comment. The implication in your blog post is that it has to be different from the foot. What I'm saying is that we should explicitly not do that. A new iteration of the foot is fine. Eliminating the foot is what I take issue with. Fedora went through a similar process a few years ago. A lot of effort was made to ensure we retained all the aspects of the Fedora Infinity logo iconography in the new one. A new GNOME logo mark should go along the same vein. To be honest, I think that the existing trend is kind of disappointing. I have many thoughts about why it's happening, but it's too hard to organize right now at nearly 2 AM after a week of mental agony. I think there needs to be a step back and rethink about the progression of depersonalization that has been going on and find a new way to express things that acknowledge the project's roots and sense of community. For some time now, I felt like there's this weird tension of feeling like a community versus feeling like a commercial product, and it shows up all over the project in different ways, overly generic names for applications, and the UX trends in GNOME versus GNOME Circle versus community engagement versus contributor engagement, etc. Some of this is kind of normal, given the makeup of GNOME contributors and what they do, but I feel like this was one of the outcomes of that tension. And the foot is quirky and weird. That's okay. Humans are supposed to be quirky and weird. If we're afraid to be real in that sense, then I don't know what we're doing to make GNOME endure as a community that produces a product that people might want to use. I do agree with Neil that this idea of like very corporate-y, plain, simple design, I don't think it's a good direction. I like the foot personally. I do agree that a redesign of the foot to make it make sense on social media is probably a good idea because, again, designed in 2002, designed with literally no concept of web usage outside of maybe a favicon. And even then, I doubt there was even much thought put into that. So nothing is changing in the immediate. The logo is staying the logo. This is just opening a discussion about whether or not this should be the logo going forward. And I'd like to know your thoughts. Do you like the GNOME foot? Would you like it to be more modernized to work on social media platforms as a favicon, things like that? Would you like a complete redesign? I would love to know. Let me know your thoughts down below. So if you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patrons, Grabs, and LiberaPay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and Show me your feet.